What's going on, everybody? I'm going to be going over some stuff for Dante today. Basically, it's going to be kind of like a critical look at some of the differences between previous versions of Dante in DMC and comparing them to DMC5. Basically, I just want to go over like some of the things that are some of his strengths, some of his weaknesses, why some of those weaknesses were really bad decisions, why some of the positives and strengths were really good decisions, and basically just take a look at why some of these things were received so negatively, and where the character kind of struggles. So that's what we're going to be doing for probably the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so. So sit back, grab something to eat, grab something to drink, and let's go take a look at what DMC5 Dante has to offer. We'll begin with Dante's overall speed in 5. Let's not lie to ourselves, this guy is really slow in this game, and that's not just a side effect of not having turbo. However, that does make it much, much worse to have any of these speed differences in this game. Many of his moves, most importantly, the key moves that he has that make him who he is, were slowed down for reasons unknown. And one of those moves, or one of those skills or abilities that were changed and made much slower, was Guard. So that's the one we're going to take a look at right now. Now, Guard is a lot more than just a defensive option. Guard is also a move and an ability that gets used to cancel things. Most of the common ones that you would see in DMC4 were things like Million Stab, or Yamato Combo A, maybe Twosome Time, Aerial Rave, and there were a couple other moves, but those were some of the more important ones. So what do those moves look like in this game? Well, Guard, in 4, let's say you open up the game right now and you started running around, start tapping on Guard. If you were to mash it as quickly as you wanted to, every single mash, or every single input that you put into the game, it would come out every single time. There was no delay. And in this game, for some reason, they added a lot of recovery, and it's easily noticeable, not just from like playing the game, but also just from viewing it. And this is something that affects his entire move list. It's not just something that's like, oh, well, Guard is slower, that's okay. Keep in mind that Guard is something that gets used to cancel a lot of things. So this has a ripple effect on the entire move list and how it gets played. Because basically, let's say you wanted to cancel Million Stab. Right, so you do Million Stab, and this is what it looks like in this game. It's much slower. Not to mention that Million Stab is also much slower in this game as well. But that's... Well, it's not besides the point, but I mean, it adds to the point that I'm making, which is that everything affects everything. And Guard being slower means that on the ground and in the air, anything that you cancel with Guard, the sequence or the string is going to be much slower than it used to be. And it's really not a change that I can say I understand. It's not as if in 4 you could ever mash to guard something. You would get hit most of the time. And in this game, if you really wanted to, you could also just sit here and do this. You know, nothing is stopping you from doing it. If you mess up the timing, worst case scenario is, I mean, maybe you'll get like a normal Guard. But in this game, if you just normal Guard something and you have meter, you're gonna get a regular Guard anyways. At the cost of 1 bar, you're gonna get a Royal Guard. If you don't have any meter, which is very rare, that's the only time in which the Guard will break. But other than that, in terms of balance, it's not really a change that makes sense, since, again, mashing Guard is not something that anyone would ever do. And it's also not really an ideal or practical option, I guess. So that's one of the speed changes, and again, it affects everything. How you gain height, how you lose height. You can also use it for setups, things like this. But even though those kinds of changes may have a positive effect on something, like for example that Mustang setup that I just did, if you remove the, or at least using the tools that are available to us right now, the very limited tools for modding this game, if you were to remove that Guard recovery, this setup becomes a whole lot harder because that recovery is non-existent. You're altering how the animation plays out, and unfortunately it makes using Guard for that setup a little bit more difficult. It's still possible, but it's a little more difficult. And my point in mentioning the Mustang glitch with that particular setup is that even though a change like this may have its own nuances and a positive in some way, overall the negatives of a change like that are very detrimental to the character as a whole. There's a very similar example with Million Stab. So Million Stab, as I mentioned before, is much slower in this game. I guess what they did was they took the Million Stab from Combo B, and they made that the Million Stab that's part of, like, is an extension of Stinger. The reason this is bad is because every single time you do Million Stab, you see how he pulls his arm back and then he starts stabbing? That change is something you notice if you've been playing DMC4 for years. Even DMC3. And DMC3 was something that had Million Stab on a 6-button mash input. But through buffering, you could get that Million Stab out quickly if you needed it. And in DMC4, the transition between Stinger to Million Stab as soon as you got next to an enemy was 1 frame. A single frame. In DMC5, Million Stab was made to maybe like 10 or so frames. It's something, I mean, maybe it's more. It's not something that I've counted, but it's definitely slower. And it's such a drastic change that you notice it every time you play. I mean, whether you play DMC4 or not, that change is something you're definitely going to notice. So, again, one of the strings that's very common in DMC4 is Million Stab, Guard Cancel, High Time. Now keep in mind that, again, Guard was made slower, and the transition between Stinger and Million Stab was made slower. So that's 2 changes that take one of his best options and make it slower for no real reason. And you end up with something like this. And DMC4, this is almost instant. In this game, you have to... It's like trying to run through mud, basically. It feels really, really bad. And there's a lot of changes like this, and a lot of like just dumb stuff that doesn't need to be this slow. So like I mentioned previously, Guard having recovery has its own little nuance that makes it useful for one specific thing. So what is this startup, what does this lag between the transition for Stinger and Million Stab actually have to offer? Well, in DMC3, if you did Million Stab, it would autocorrect every single time. And the same thing happens here. That's something that wasn't included in 4, but it is something that is included in DMC5 Dante. And you can see this whenever you turn around like this. You have to cross up. This is not a bad thing. This is actually a pretty nice change. The problem is that if this is the reason that the transition is slower, then I would much rather not have that autocorrect at all. And that is what the Million Stab change does, that we currently have, is that it removes that transition entirely, but you lose the autocorrect. And this is an example, again, of a nuance being so not worthless, but the benefits of having that autocorrect don't outweigh the positives of having a much faster Million Stab. And again, this is something that's useful. It's just not worth making Million Stab this slow just for an autocorrect. And really, you could have the speed of Million Stab, the same kind of speed that we had in DMC4, and have that autocorrect at the same time. DMC3's Million Stab was very quick. It was not this slow. It never needed to be this slow. But for some reason, that's just how Million Stab is. And Million Stab, again, is one of his best ground options. It always has been. But because it's made slower, it isn't nearly as useful as it used to be. Or at least, it's not as good as it used to be. But it's definitely still viable, and it's still something that gets used very often. Million Stab is not something you can replace, not even with something like this. So, that's one of the ways that a speed change will negatively affect Dante, and unfortunately it's on one of his best moves. So Cerberus is a returning weapon from DMC3. However, it comes with a whole bag of new tricks. And all those tricks are pretty welcome. The thing is that where they place them on the move list kind of ties in with this problem of urgency or I guess lack of immediacy, if that makes sense. Most of its new moves are on inputs that really don't need to be there. So what do I mean by this? A lot of moves deserve to be charge inputs. Something like, for example, anything on Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a weapon that had a lot of charge inputs, and that's because you could hold it to get more strength or more power out of the move that you got. Or in some cases, for example, in this game it's a mash, but in DMC4, you could just hold this button, and you would get more hits out of your Dragon Punch. Well, with these moves, they're not really the same. They don't get any stronger by, or rather, the amount of time you spend charging and holding down an input doesn't determine the amount of strength or the amount of knockback. It has no influence on how the move displaces or does what it does. The move will always have the exact same effect no matter how long you charge. With moves like this for example is basically just air raid from DMC3 or Alistair's, or DMC1's Alistair. But this move here, there's no reason for it to not be on a directional input. He has no directional inputs in the air other than a revolver, long revolver, and that's it. For Cerberus, that's literally it. In the air, you have pull play on style, and that's all you got. There are no directional inputs for specials. And that, my point is that they could have very easily put those charge moves on those directional inputs. And it would make it so much better to be able to use this, because as it is right now, you always need to use swing. That's why swing is as slow as it is. At least that's how I see it. Is that it's not as snappy as it was in DMC3, and that was solely for the purpose of allowing you to charge in the air through the use of swing. Because any other method, you can still charge by doing this. That's a lot harder than just, I don't know, high time into that. All the charge moves they match the time that it takes for swing to start and stop animating. For example, if I wanted to use that, if I wanted to use turbulence in the air, it only takes one swing, and that's it. But the problem with having a move like this is, or rather, the problem with having moves on charges like this is that, one, you're going to make a move like swing this slow just for the sake of letting us charge in the air, or having a very easy way of charging in the air. When you could avoid that problem altogether by simply putting them on directional inputs. We don't need to make this move worse just to make other moves charge inputs. It's very unnecessary. And that doesn't even... we're not even getting into this area of what about custom control layouts, which a lot of people use. I play on default, but I know a lot of people that don't. In fact, default gets a lot of weird looks, especially in the context of DMC5, just because these things like charge moves exist. So, for something like this, the difficulty of a very simple sequence like that may vary depending on the person because they use different control schemes. And those charge inputs become a pain in the ass. You never hear anyone complaining about Stinger being on lock-on forward melee. You definitely hear people complaining if that shit was on a charge input. So that's what I'm getting at, basically, is that these moves are very important. Moves that displace like this should not be charge inputs, no matter how effective they are. It's really ridiculous. And these moves don't get as much use as they could be getting, simply because of how long they take to use, and the very linear setups that are required to use those moves in the first place. So that's one of the things that, again, he's lacking that urgency that's kind of expected out of his move list. So that's all I got on Cerberus, really.
And now I'm gonna play with you.
Cavalier, it has to be probably one of my favorite weapons in the whole series. Nothing really says Dante quite like him riding around on a motorcycle and just hitting shit with it. The thing is, it's a weapon that's really held back by its design. Or at least the theme of its design, I guess, if that makes any sense. And it's like, it's a very interesting weapon, and I think it's a lot of fun to use, but it doesn't really have that many uses, and it's also missing something that's very important to Dante, which is a way to gain height through the use of something like Splash or Aerial Revolver. And it's also kind of got this problem where a lot of its most important moves are tied behind very long, very just meh strings. This is what I'm getting at, basically, is let's say I want to use that move, the donut, right, at the end of combo beat. That's how long it takes me to get to the donut. Which is something that really, again, just like Cerberus, could have been on an input. Anything but putting it all the way at the end of a string. No matter how you do it, you're always going to have to do a lot of things to get to the important part, or the thing that displaces, that doesn't just stun. And even then, let's say you want to do something that doesn't stun, you just want to use it for, I don't know, momentum, or not momentum, but you want to use it for movement. If I do Slipstream, I can't guard cancel this, not until I get to the thing that I'm hitting. And even then, that takes time. Slipstream is very slow, and if I don't have SDT to cancel out of this, the only option I have to end it early is to get hit. Or wait until I hit something, or hope that I hit something, because if I whiff, I'm stuck in that recovery for a while. Now you do get iframes for using this, and that's very useful. But this weapon was a missed opportunity for a lot of reasons, and it only makes this problem of speed worse. Because there's a lot of things in this weapon that are actually very useful and they're very good. They'd be great for movement. If I could just ride this around and use this however the hell I wanted to, and teleport out of it, this full throttle would see so much more use. And really, there's no reason for a motorcycle to not just be this mobility monster. And I think they kind of had that idea with Redline. Redline's very good. It doesn't have that problem that all the other moves in this fucking weapon have, is that it doesn't need to wait to get to the important part, which is its air stinger. I could just do it. It's on back-forward style. Unfortunately, this move, with as important as it is locked behind a paywall. It's a DLC weapon. I know the bike itself is a very different color from Cavalier R, but that's just because I have a visual mod on. But this is Cavalier R. You can see that on the HUD down on the bottom right. This is Cavalier R. Now, all of these moves have something on them that is useful. Again, the nuances exist. You'll find nuance in anything. But the thing is that it's not as useful as just having those parts of the moves available or make them cancelable earlier on. And that's, again, it's sort of where that speed issue comes in, is that there's a lot of watching and there's not a lot of playing with Cavalier, if that makes sense. There's a whole lot of waiting, there's a whole lot of, like, you gotta get in line before you fucking get to the thing you want. It's like, yeah, you have all this cool stuff, but I'm not really doing anything different. All these moves are just slow, and they stun, and that's it. It's just a lot of stun. Now there isn't an issue with a move stunning. The problem, however, is that it's very redundant. This move stuns, this one stuns, so does this, so does Slipstream, so does the second part of Combo B. This one launches only at the very end, and the thing is that these moves, they do have, like, there's the whole gear system on Cavalier, which, if you time your moves properly, and I'm not going to bother explaining all of gear system, but basically, the gear system just says that if you time your moves a certain way, you'll get the fastest variation of it because you'll be in over top gear, or you'll be in top gear. There's a couple different gears. However, with the way that people tend to play this game at a higher level, this kind of directly conflicts with a lot of playstyles. And again, it's immediacy that we're looking for. Nobody wants to just sit here and wait for this thing to hit a ton, deal a shitload of damage, so that by the time I actually get to the move I want, the thing's already dead. And I mean, this is an issue even on DMD. You know, and I play with a lot of mods on. I have a damage modifier on. By default, it's set to 0.5. That's this normal base game damage. I set mine to 0.4, sometimes 0.3, and everything on this weapon is still killing way too quickly. And that's just because I want to get to the move that I want to use. And it's way too slow to be useful. Even with this, you know, if this was something that was cancelable, like if I could guard cancel out of this, or I could just Mustang out of it, it'd be even better. Because then, like, you'd have that first part of the move that you do want to use. So, for example, you'd be able to do something like Million Stab, it's a combo B, this, and then guard cancel. And when you guard cancel, you notice where this places you. Right here. That's a pretty nice spot to be in. And it might not seem like anything, but the thing is that thing that makes Devil May Cry and Dante as a whole very fun to play and makes them very different, makes them something that's very unique to the genre, is the level of flexibility that you'll find within the move list and the mechanics of the system. And this kind of weapon, again, it sort of contradicts it, and it conflicts with that idea that this system and this game is flexible. It doesn't really allow you to be creative or expressive. It's you have to play a very specific way, and the way that the developers intended for you to play, or you just don't get the benefits of the end of the strings or the moves that you have, with the exception of, again, Redline, which is a move you have to pay extra money for. Real money, by the way. And this is a move that you can use anywhere. You can use it on the ground, you can use it on the air, and I would like to mention that with full throttle and wheelie jump as well, this is wheelie jump, by the way, you can do Redline after you do either one of those moves. That's the only extension that you have off of these things, unless you have SDT. And while yes, it's nice that the option exists, again, why should you have to pay extra? It's not like Redline is not just one move. It's not just an air stinger. This weapon contains a move that is just as useful as a ground stinger. Ground stinger closes the distance between you and a target. Of course, it creates that gap as well, but the point is that it moves you and it takes you somewhere, and that's very valuable in a game like this. Not to mention that Redline is not just an air stinger. It's an air stinger that displaces. It has armor. You can also reverse it. Oh, well, okay. You can't exactly reverse it in the base game, but with modifications, you can add buffered reversals, and you can make Redline take Dante anywhere you want, and you can cancel out into SDT, and you have something that is not... It's not reminiscent of guard flying, but it can accomplish a lot of the same things in terms of positioning, if you were able to reverse this move. I'm not going to say that you're paying extra for guard flying. I'm not going to say that Redline is your guard fly, but it allows you to play in a very similar fashion. And it's just... It's a shame to see this weapon be like this, and contain moves like Redline, but the rest of the weapon is nothing like the move that you're paying extra for. And there's no reason for the weapon to be like this. It's just another missed opportunity, and it's really just a shame. And the thing is, you can have both. You really can. There's like, you can have Slipstream, and just make it so that when I press it once, like let's say I do it from back here, right? If I do Slipstream, if I were to press it again, just let me finish the move. Why do I have to commit to this move? Yeah, I get iframes in the beginning, but I have to commit to it all the way to the end, and if it misses for whatever reason, then I'm just stuck there in recovery. You know? And the same applies to this. It's like, why does this move exist if this move also exists? You know, again, there's a lot of redundancy in this. There's no point in having it like this. So here we have another weapon that's also really held back by the way that they wanted to design it through this like separation of two different modes. I know what you're seeing is Gilgamesh, but it's not Gilgamesh. It's just Balrog. I don't like how Balrog looks, so it's an aesthetic mod. But all the functions are still the same. The move list is completely untouched for this video. So Balrog was one of those weapons that looked super interesting, and it looked like it was going to be one of the most impressive parts of Dante's move list in DMC5 prior to the release of the game. It was that really interesting weapon where we were like, this is the thing that we need to be using. This is that really good weapon. And unfortunately, that didn't really turn out to be the case. I mean, it still is the weapon that, or a weapon that you have to use. I don't think there's, other than maybe Cavalier, there is really, like, you can't take out Balrog, you can't take out Cerberus without losing something very valuable. Mostly because you have Dive Kick on Balrog. There's no other weapon that has anything like that. But this is the first time that a weapon is separated like this, and it has two modes. So you have your kick mode, and you also have something called blow mode, which is basically just punch mode. I'm not sure why they were named that. They could have just called it punch mode and everybody would know what they were talking about. But it's blow mode and it's kick mode. So why is kick mode and blow mode something that's just kind of mediocre in the eyes of some? Well, the thing is that let's say you wanted to be able to do something like flash kick, or maybe not flash kick, you want to do straight punch into flash kick. You have to switch first, every single time. And it's kind of restrictive. There's no point in it being like this, and you're going to hear that a lot, at least coming from me, is that things don't need to be this way. They could have very easily just made it a passive switch, or something a little different, like instead of cluttering the move list with a lot of the same functions just for the purpose of like having a helmet breaker or having an aerial rave on each mode, just make it so that you have all the necessary and important functions tied to, or not tied to, but have all the necessary and important functions and remove all of the unnecessary shit. The only reason that this mode exists is so that you can have a rave in the air, you can have like a launcher on this instead of just only having Volcano or something. And at the same time, you could have very easily just put a lot of those moves on, yet again, directional inputs. And it really holds this weapon back because it's a phenomenal weapon. Or at least the concept for it is. There's a lot of really great moves on it. I love Flash Kick. This right here is just Virgil's Rising Sun from DMC3. This right here is a better draw, and when you have Ignition, that shit launches. I mean, you really couldn't ask for much more out of a move like this. This is super good. And unfortunately, that's not something that you can really just use whenever. You have to be in that mode. And again, it's the immediacy that we want. We just don't have that available to us at all times. You know, if I wanted to do something like dive kick into welter dodges, you can't, because you have to switch first. And unfortunately, a lot of the most interesting aspects to this weapon can be found when you mix together these different moves from different modes. And it's funny too, because currently there does exist a mod that allows you to have a passive switch between these two modes. And when you're using that weapon like this, it's just so fluid, and you can use things in such a creative manner that's unique to you. You aren't tied down or restricted by like having to be in blow mode, or oh, you want to use a kick now, well, you gotta be in kick mode. And it's not an awful system. It's just, again, it doesn't make any sense for a DMC game. And it's unfortunate that it's like that. Also, too, one of the things about Balrog that really sucks is that it's missing Hammer, kind of. It's got that same Cavalier problem, where the important parts are tied to the end of a string, and this is only so that you can charge Ignition in the air, which is a really lousy excuse. So Ignition is this, it's this invisible meter, sort of invisible. And basically, the more punches you land, the more enraged the weapon gets, I guess. And then you build up that meter, and you see I just ran out of Ignition. But let's say I punch 10 times. I'm charged up, I got Ignition. Now I have a lot of properties that I didn't have before. I got a ton of extra damage, I can launch. I can deal more damage with something like this, and this deals a shit ton of damage too. This will launch as well. You can cancel into welter and get some stuff off of it as well. You get a ton of benefits out of this. But it runs out. And that's no good in a game like this. Properties that are that important should never be tied to a mechanic like this. Because, again, it's having to play a very specific way just to get to the fucking point. I don't want to sit there and punch 10 times just to get ignition. If ignition were something like just extra damage, okay, maybe I'd accept it. You know, I think that would be alright. It's justified. You gotta land your hits, and you have to, like, not get hit in order to, like, basically, if you want to succeed, you have to know how to play. Don't get hit. Use all the time that you have in ignition properly so that you can squeeze out the most damage you can, but never tie properties like this to a time mechanic. That's like, imagine if I had to land a certain amount of shots before the shotgun started knocking back, or I had to, like, do Dance Macabre every single time I wanted Stinger to knock back. Like, you know why that's a problem. And again, it's not about, oh, well, the functions already exist. You can just Stinger and you have that knockback. You can just use the shotgun and knockback if you want to. You have a million different knockbacks. Like, why is it important that, you know, like, oh, Dante's got this launcher, he's also got this launcher, he has high time, he has this. Why does he need to have flint wheel launch every single time? And while there is some truth to an argument like that is a valid argument, is, oh, the function already exists, then it's fine. He's not, like, any less capable than he was before he was in ignition. The problem is that, again, it goes against that level of flexibility that makes this game entertaining and fun to a lot of the people who are really good at it. And of course, you can still use it for movement if you want to, but that launch is very useful. And not having it is really ridiculous. Having to sit here and dance around for like 3 seconds every single time, or having to land 10 punches, it's not fun. There's only so many, like, actual moves that do this. We don't want to have to use feather every single time, especially not to just knock something down. Those first 2 punches should not exist. You should just have this last punch on a Stinger input in the air. If you want to do the rave, just make it on melee, or put it on melee or something. It's just this separation of really important features is found throughout the entire move list, and it holds this character back tremendously. For arbitrary reasons, really. Ignition is a waste of time. It's a worthless mechanic. You could have just easily made this deal more damage, and that's it. It's like, you wouldn't be losing anything, and Dante would still have all of his important properties. But instead, we were given a system that holds him back like this. And that's really all I got on Balrog, is that it's, yet again, another, like, missed opportunity. I didn't even talk about how Welter is actually a very nice system. I do like it. It allows you to cancel out of stuff early. So, for example, like Volcano is a move that used to be very slow, and it still is slow, but it's also one of his faster moves now in the air. I think it's a little bit faster than Helmet Breaker. Yeah, it's definitely faster than Helmet Breaker. It seems to, like, accelerate the more you're in the air, or the higher up you are. And being able to do something like a straight punch and then hold melee to cancel it with Welter into, like, a side dodge is super good. That's fucking insane. And, like, it's a really nice way of still having to earn the cancel without making it free. But the problem is that you can't really do these things as quickly as you'd need to. So, for example, if I want to do this, I have to wait all that time just to be able to side dodge out of it. It takes a fucking eternity just to be able to side dodge. And it's just dumb. Everything takes way too long, especially on Balrog. So, this one is a little different. It's both one of Dante's best additions and one of his worst, in my opinion. So the Devil Sword Dante is an interesting weapon, and it's really, really good. Let's just get that right out of the way. This fucking weapon is ridiculous. But it's so ridiculous that it's kind of a problem. DSD is made for, like, I guess, like, a certain playstyle, right? Like, not everybody's going to want to be able to do all this stuff. It's difficult to explain, but DSD doesn't really feel like something that belongs to Dante. Sword hangers have always, like, in my eyes, they've been something that's belonged to Virgil since DMC3. Not really DMC1, even though he had summon swords in that game. DSD is really a Virgil thing to me, and that's kind of like my issue with a lot of stuff in Dante's move list now, is that most of it does not feel like a Dante thing. Just like side tricks on SDT, this to me is a Virgil thing. It always has been. And being able to do stuff like this is, I mean, I don't think Dante's ever had that without being able to do something like aerial rape JC gunshot. You know, and maybe like some very, very like specific and super demanding Lucifer setup. He's never been able to like displace the enemy like this whenever he wants. I don't know. That's more of a personal thing. I've never liked it for that reason. But it goes without saying that DSD has its benefits, and it's definitely earned its place on Dante's move list, or just his whole arsenal in general. Basically, Devil Sword Dante lets you displace enemies in whatever way you want, whenever you want too. There's a really weird bug where, like, if you input a summon sword formation at the same time as a special move, for some special moves, it eats the input, and that's a frame perfect thing that, like, you'll never see it. It barely ever happens, but for the most part, you're always able to do this whenever you want. These swords are available to you at all times, and that's super good. High times is basically just having the Lucifer glitch whenever you want. This is like having shotgun at all times, except it's a little better because it constantly pushes. It's like a wave. And four-handed is like a multi-hitting summon sword hanger, and like how you delay it matters. It's actually really good. And on top of that, when you DT, you have a bunch of like extra formations in Swordmaster. It's kind of crazy. Every single weapon has something on it that's unique to it. And then in Gunslinger, it shoots these automatic swords that like knock back instead of juggle. It's a pretty interesting weapon. Now here's my problem, is that the game still gives you the option to choose between Rebellion, Sparta, DSD. It lets you change the order of your weapons. It gives you, like, you can see how many slots it gives you. It gives you 7, so you can equip everything at once if you really wanted to. Not sure why you would. 2 of the weapons are exactly the same. Actually, 4 of them are exactly the same. And one of them is objectively better than all the other options, and that's kind of where my issue is that it sort of has this like illusion of choice, where it's like, yeah, you can use Rebellion and Sparta if you want to. You know, if you don't like these summon swords, you don't have to use them, but you're gonna lose a lot of good options. And it's not just losing the option, you literally can't use some of these moves. For example, that's a really common like sequence that I have. So I do this into Air Mustang, and then I do like Rave, or I do something else, right? Let's say I wanted to use Mana Red. That right there is not possible with Rebellion at all. And this Air Mustang is incredibly useful to him. It's a really cool move. And it's also one of the only ways that he can actually get momentum in the vanilla game. I don't have inertia on right now. I also don't really use it. I just play like the game without inertia, and this is the only option you have. Aside from Rainstorm, this is the only way you can move around. Reliably, at least. And you need four-handed for this kind of thing. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do any of this stuff. And this is my issue with DSD, is that it's an excellent addition, but the whole move list, at least the moves that really matter, are completely dependent on a lot of these formations, whether it be high times or four-handed. It's mostly those two. Not really stingers, but four-handed and high times are some of the most important ones. And you need them to do things with Faust. You need them to do things with like fucking Kalina Ann's ground moves. You can't really do much without them. Really, the only way that you can juggle to set up for Kalina Ann in if you didn't have DSD and you only had Rebellion is using something like Crystal into Thunderclap, which is like the Nevin air plays. So you do like Crystal Thunderclap, and then you do like the Gunslinger stuff. But even then, you barely have enough time to catch them. And it's not just that you lose options; it's that you literally you lose the ability to use those moves completely. If I didn't use four-handed, this is the only place I really ever get to use Mad Hatter. And even if I do use Mad Hatter, it doesn't really accomplish anything. Because I juggle him in the air for 1 second, and then he falls back down to the ground, and then he's right back up to where he was before if I pull him. And for some enemies, that does not work. You need to keep them juggled, because if they drop on the ground, the pull does not deal enough stun to relaunch them. So say like something like a what's the name of that enemy? I guess like a riot, something like that, right? Like a riot. If I were to do this doesn't always work when I pull a second time, because I have to deal a certain amount of stun before they can be like displaced again. And that's where four-handed comes in, because if you had four-handed with Rebellion or something like it, or if the move was just faster overall, that wouldn't be a problem. You'd be able to do this if you wanted to. And the move at certain heights is just not usable. And it's not just a FOSS thing, it's also a problem with Air Mustang. So if I wanted to use Air Mustang, I have to like either launch and then use the move, because every single launch in this game has like this weird float. You can see it every time you launch something. You know, it's suspended in the air there for a second. I use a gunshot, it just starts falling immediately. And that float is the only thing that lets you use moves like this. And of course, if I switch weapons, the fucking FOSS tab disappears. You know, let's just tack on more problems. But a lot of the moves are not really usable the way that they are with DSD, and it's kind of what the moves are good for. It's not as if like, yes, of course I could sit here and like I could pull with the hat if I want to, if it works. But that's not always the case, especially like if you're really high up. You can't always use these moves unless you have forehand. Like right there, that would drop with Rebellion. I don't have a way to keep them in the air. And if I wanted to use something like, it's called Magic Hat. It's on Lock On Back style. This turret is actually really good, but it has a problem that makes it unusable, and this is why nobody ever uses it. It disappears if you use any of the other moves, which is ridiculous, because you could have, again, it's the way that they like place inputs, or the way that they place moves on different inputs. You could have just put this on shoot, or rather you could have put this on style. This doesn't have to be on shoot, and even then, there's no reason for Mad Hatter to not be usable when you have Magic Hat out. And so what I'm saying is, FOSS could have very easily been the thing that allows you to use Rebellion or Sparta just as effectively as DSD lets you play. It should be a choice, and you don't simply choose the worst option when a really good option is available. What I'm saying is, DSD is mandatory if you want to squeeze the most out of this character, and I don't think that should be the case. Especially not when something like this exists, because FOSS has all the functions necessary to let you be just as good, or let Rebellion be just as good as DSD, but you'd have to use different setups, and you'd have to play differently. And being able to play with FOSS Hat like this in Rebellion, like if the FOSS Hat never disappeared, it would be a lot more like how Dante used to play. It'd be something that people are more familiar with, and again, DSD doesn't feel like something that really belongs to Dante in my eyes. But that's my biggest issue with DSD, is that he's way too dependent on it, and it kind of sucks. Because I really don't like using this weapon, but I have to, and it's kind of stupid. Not everybody likes this weapon. So SDT is a really cool mechanic. I think it's probably one of the most interesting ways to merge one of his old DT forms from DMC2 into a newer installment, and basically just buff it in every way. Not only is it just this really, really strong and powerful mode that's made for damage, it also acts as an omni-cancel. And it's here in DMC5 as an additional resource that you have to manage, as opposed to it being just a thing that you have when you're at like 10% health. This is a much better way of doing it. I don't think anybody even really needs to talk about how piss poor DMC2 is and pretty much everything that's in it. But this game definitely took this DT form and just cranked it up to 1,000. There's a lot of good stuff in this, And let's cover most of it right now. So you have Vortex, which is just Psycho Crusher. It's from it's basically Alistair's Vortex from DMC1 and Nevin's Vortex from DMC3. You also have this really strong-ass launcher. It's Inferno from DMC1, I guess. I mean, I guess it's about the same. You have a Teleport. Teleport's just kind of mediocre. It's okay. You have Rolling Blaze. Rolling Blaze is just that thing that deals damage when you jump. You have this on Balrog as well. You have Side Tricks for left, right, and diagonal as well, which is really interesting. He's never had that before. I don't think anybody has. And he's got this SDT combo, I think is what it's called. You have that both on the ground and in the air, because technically you're in the air at all times. You also have a flight mode, which is, I think it's called Air Raid in this game. I'm not sure what it's called. You have these really long-ass jumps in almost any direction. I think this is called the Loose, and this is Demolition. It's like, this was basically like Magneto's gravity squeeze, I guess, if you played Marvel 3. Now this Vortex is something that you can control and take in any direction. Unfortunately, it's not cancelable with Side Tricks or anything. You also have this move, which is not very useful, but it's there if you want it. It just deals a lot of damage from any range, and it always takes you out SDT. But that's SDT in a nutshell. Right? Now you're going to notice that this is completely different from your game if you're playing on console or you don't have the trainers available that I do. My SDT is bound, or not bound, but it's set to instant charge. And I'll explain why in a second. Basically, SDT is one of those things that makes Dante really, really good in DMC5. I mean, this is by far his best mechanic, or his best new addition, rather. I wouldn't say it's his best mechanic, but it's one of the best things that he received. And the thing about it is that once again, it's a resource that you have to manage, but it's very unforgiving. And it's not something that you have available at all times. And the rules that are set in place for SDT, they aren't really good for high-level play. This feels very gimmicky as a result. You'll see like someone like myself get a lot of use out of this on stream because I have these settings on that allow me to use it whenever I want. And I understand why it has to be this way. The mode was intended to be something like very, very strong, very powerful, and if you want these kinds of benefits, then you need to earn it. The issue is that you can only use the benefits that make it very interesting at high-level play if you're at Quad S, which is like a very specific set of requirements, and if you have the meter for it. And even when you have that meter, it takes a lot of time to charge. A lot of time to charge. Actually, I can turn off quick SDT here. That's how long it takes to charge by default if you're in Quad S, which I currently am. As opposed to that super fast charge that I had before. Now, again, the reason that this is a problem is not necessarily because of the charge input. Charge inputs do work in some games, but this is Devil May Cry, and not everybody plays on default. Some people put double trigger on square, and that kind of control scheme doesn't really work well with rules like this and charge times that take this long. It's the same problem that Cerberus has, where not everyone can really use it in the same way because of their control scheme. And it's not really a problem of the control scheme necessarily. It's more an issue of how long it takes to charge. There isn't really something wrong with that. It's just that for the things that a lot of us are looking for, these charge times don't work very well, which is why, like, recently I've been using quick SDT so that I can just get to it. Even though I play on default and I have my DT set to L1, it still is very nice to be able to just get in and out of SDT like this, and you can use it more because of it. I don't always have to be holding down the charge, and it's super nice too because, as I mentioned before, this game doesn't have inertia. At least not in the same way that 4 did. It's very linear, and it's, I guess the word would be scarce. You can sometimes find it, I guess. You have it on this. If you use Air Mustang, if buffer a move. You can like sometimes get momentum on them, like this. But that's all you can really use it for. And then you can like control rainstorm, I guess. But that's, you don't replace momentum. That doesn't work that way. This is the equivalent of being able to airstrafe in something like TF2 after a rocket jump. You know, just because you can rocket jump up doesn't mean that it's okay if they take out the ability to airstrafe. You still need the ability to move around like that and choose where you're going. The same mentality applies here, to where inertia allowed you to move wherever you wanted to, and removing that made it very difficult for Dante to move around. So they gave him new options to be able to move left, right, forward, back, or control where it is you want to go with something like Rainstorm. But these aren't really good enough. And the thing is that they tied one of the most important movement options to SDT, which again it's a resource that requires way too much management, is too unforgiving in the sense of like how much is expected before you're allowed to get in and out of quad SDT. And it takes too long to charge for a lot of control schemes. Not everybody plays on default. Again, that's really important to remember. And having this quick SDT charge like this, it doesn't make sense for how strong it is. But if you were to rebalance this, this Devil Trigger, this mode, specifically so that it can be used more often and it's more widely applicable, it would be perfectly acceptable to have charge times like this. And there's a lot more that can be said about that. But basically my point is that having movement options like this is really good. It's not guard flying, but I'll accept it if I would be able to use it more often. If I just had this available to me at all times without modifications, I'd be like, okay, you know what? This game may not have guard flying, but I have SDT. I'll give it a look. And it turned out to be a really, really good Devil Trigger form. And that's where you're going to find that momentum that you can use in a way that's unique to you. But it's on a very gimmicky Devil Trigger and a mode that is used for one very specific kind of play. Even when you want to use it in a way that's unique to you, in a way that's a little more flexible, with, say, quad SDT canceling, you still have to be at an S rank. In fact, you have to be at a triple S rank in order to use the benefits of an Omni cancel like this. And by the time you get there, most of the stage is going to die. Most of the enemies that are given to you are dead. And even if they're not, there's still so much buildup to just get to the best parts of the character. And the thing that annoys me about this too is that, like, yes, I understand that the requirements for SDT are expecting you to earn all these benefits, but I also earned all the combos that I land and all the different like unique sequences that I came up with on my own because I spent time playing to experiment and find those things that are very interesting. So either way, if I had this cancel available to me at all times under different circumstances, like, I would still earn what I'm doing. It's just I'm earning it in a different way. So my point is that Quad SDT is a very nice addition, but it really needs to be reworked in order to be useful at high level play. Or at least, maybe not useful, that's a bit of a stretch, because it definitely has its uses. It's not like it's non-existent. Even in the base game, it still gets used. But this character, he refuses to reach his full potential until SDT is more widely applicable. Because as it stands right now in the base game, it's just not as good as it can be. And it fails to be this thing that, like, really makes him better than DMC4 Dante in my eyes. I'm not saying that like that's an objective fact or something, or that like DMC4 Dante will always be better than 5 Dante. I think they both have their pros and cons. And as the game has evolved, I think the game has really proven to be quite nice, at least with modifications, that is. I don't think the vanilla game has that much to offer. But either way, Quad SDT being this restrictive is what holds him back from being much better and making me never want to look back at 4. Amongst other things, but really, like, SDT is that thing that ties it together for me. It's just, it needs to be better, and its requirements need to be changed. That's all I have for SDT. So that's really all I got on DMC5 Dante. All the stuff that really matters, I think. There's plenty more that can be said. We could be here for days, really, talking about like how much stuff could be different or could be better, or how much is really good about him in comparison to 4. I don't really think it's necessary. I think I already got the point across, is that he's a really good character, but he's lacking, and there's a lot of missed opportunities all over the place that stop him from being as good as he could really be. Which is a shame, since it's already been done better before in some of the areas where he's lacking. It's just bizarre to me. But either way, he's fun to play. He's not awful, but he's not really Dante either. It's a strange feeling, and I think, like, even as time goes on, I don't think that feeling's ever gonna go away. He'll always be like some weird hybrid of many characters now, as opposed to being something that's like really him. But either way, he's a character with a lot of depth, and he's definitely something that should be explored in both vanilla and modded versions of the game. And I just hope that for any sequels that come in the future, or any kind of like support if there were ever to get any, I hope that they look at some of these videos or some of the changes and the discussions that people have online, and they really like examine them and they study them, because there's a ton of potential behind this move list. But until these things get changed, he's always going to be stuck in this weird position where he could be better, but he'll always be limited. So that's all I got for DMC5 Dante. Thanks for watching, guys.